Dear brothers and sisters in Christ, for over 40 years, the Adventist Development and Relief Agency, known as ADRA, has been a beacon of hope to vulnerable populations around the world. It was established by the Seventh-day Adventist Church as its humanitarian arm. ADRA's mission has always been clear: to serve humanity so all may live as God intended.
Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going deep today on the USAID funding pause and how it's impacting ADRA International.
Yeah, it's a big deal for sure. Lots of moving parts.
For sure, and we've got some interesting perspectives to dig into.
Yeah, definitely.
We've got an article from the Seventh-day Adventist News Network, so that's ADRA's kind of official voice, and then we've got a piece from Spectrum, which tends to take a more critical look at things, and they're both focused on this USAID funding freeze.
Right, and that's a 90-day pause on a massive chunk of global humanitarian aid. So, the impact is going to be felt far and wide.
Okay, so let's jump right in, and we're going to start with ADRA's official response, the ANN article. And right off the bat, they put Ted Wilson front and center. He's the president of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and sits on ADRA's board.
Interesting. I think that's a deliberate choice, putting him front and center.
Yeah. How so?
Well, it kind of adds this layer of authority and reassurance, especially for Adventists who might be concerned about ADRA's future.
So you're saying it's strategic, like they're trying to project stability in the face of this uncertainty.
Absolutely. And notice how Wilson, he acknowledges the funding gap, like he doesn't sugarcoat it, but then he immediately pivots to ADRA's commitment to continuing their work.
Yeah, he's like, hey, we're hit, but we're not down.
Exactly. And to reinforce that message, he brings in this biblical quote from Matthew 25.35 about, serving the needy. It's a very clever way to tap into those core Adventist values.
Yeah, it's like he's connecting this situation to something bigger than just money. It's about fulfilling a spiritual obligation.
Exactly.
And he even takes it a step further. He mentioned that he and his wife personally donate to ADRA.
Adding that personal touch.
It's like he's saying, I put my money where my mouth is.
Yeah, it humanizes him a bit, makes him relatable, and, it might even encourage others to follow suit, especially at a time when ADRA is facing this shortfall.
Right, so we've got the emotional appeal, but the ANN article also highlights ADRA's more practical response. They're scrambling to find alternative funding sources, reaching out to church members, private donors, the whole 9 yards. And they're very transparent about their commitment to ethical and legal compliance.
Transparency is key here. They need to reassure everyone that every dollar is being used responsibly, especially with all the scrutiny that comes with aid money.
Okay, so ADRA is putting on a brave face, emphasizing their commitment taking action. But then we turn to the Spectrum article, and the mood shifts dramatically.
Oh yeah, Spectrum, they're less interested in PR and more focused on the potential fallout of this funding pause.
It seems like they went from ADRA headquarters to the actual communities impacted by this freeze.
Right, and that's where things start to get really interesting. We're going to shift gears now from ADRA's official response to what's happening on the ground, and I think you'll be surprised by what we find.
I'm intrigued. Let's dive in.
So how Justin was talking about ADRA's commitment to serving the needy? Well, Spectrum, they kind of throw some cold water on that.
Really? How so?
Well, they point out that this funding pause could actually lead to, and I'm quoting here, food rotting and people dying. Pretty grim, right?
Wow. Yeah, that's a far cry from the optimism we saw from ADRA.
Right. It's like they're saying even if ADRA wants to help, their hands are tied.
Yeah, like without funding, they can't deliver supplies, programs can't operate.
Exactly. It's a logistical nightmare that translates to real suffering for real people.
They don't just talk in generalities. They get specific right.
Yeah, they zoom in on ADRA Brazil and their work with Venezuelan immigrants.
Right, a population that's already incredibly vulnerable. They're fleeing a humanitarian crisis in their own country.
Exactly. And ADRA Brazil, they were working with USAID on this program called Project Providencia.
Okay, and what was that about?
Well, it was all about providing food security to these migrants, making sure they had access to food, but then the funding pause hits, and the entire project is suspended.
Just like that.
Yeah, jobs are lost, and those Venezuelan families are left wondering where their next meal is coming from.
It's like they escaped one crisis only to be thrown into another.
And that's just one example. Spectrum also digs into the impact on HI Adventist Health International.
Now hold on. For those who aren't familiar with HI, can you give us a quick rundown?
Sure. HI, all about healthcare, specifically in underserved communities around the world. They run hospitals, clinics, health education programs, a lot of which focus on tackling diseases like HIV/AIDS.
Okay, so how does this funding pause impact them?
Well, a big chunk of their funding, especially for those HIV/AIDS programs, comes from PEPFAR.
PEPFAR.
Yeah, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. It's a U.S. governmental initiative, been around since 2003, and it's been a game changer in the fight against HIV/AIDS globally.
So this funding freeze is hitting PEPFAR, and that's trickling down to HI.
Exactly. And Spectrum, they don't just give us the big picture, they put a human face on this crisis by sharing the story of Denny Hong. He's the Chief Medical Officer at Kendu Adventist Hospital in Kenya.
Okay, tell me about Dr. Hong.
Well, he's on the front line of this battle against HIV/AIDS. His hospital has been providing antiretroviral therapy to over 5,200 patients, thanks in large part to PEPFAR funding.
Okay, so what happens now with the funding cutoff?
That's the heartbreaking part. He's faced with this impossible choice. How do you tell thousands of people that the medication they need to stay alive might not be available?
That's a crushing responsibility.
Right, and it's not just about the medication, it's about the trust that's been built between the hospital and the community. When that trust is broken, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild.
It makes you wonder about the long-term consequences. What happens when this funding pause turns into something more permanent?
Exactly. What happens to those patients at Kindu Hospital? What happens to the Venezuelan migrants in Brazil who are now without food assistance?
It feels like we've gone from talking about budget cuts to potentially unraveling decades of progress in healthcare and humanitarian aid. It's like we stumble onto something much bigger than just a funding gap. We started with HRIs, kind of putting on a brave face, finding new funding, reassuring everyone. But then Spectrum kind of takes us down this rabbit hole of unintended consequences.
Yeah, and it really exposes just how fragile this whole aid ecosystem is. You've got organizations like ADRA and HI doing this incredibly important work, but they're operating on a shoestring. They rely so heavily on government funding.
And then when that funding disappears even temporarily, the whole system starts to crumble.
Right, and it's not just about the organizations themselves, it's about the people they serve, the communities who depend on them for healthcare, for food, for basic survival.
And Spectrum really drives that point home.
They do. They shared the story of Austin Dice. He's the CEO of HI's Malamulo Adventist Hospital in Malare. And when the funding freeze hits, they're forced to lock up their medications. Imagine that the patients who need those medications are suddenly left with nothing.
It's like a betrayal almost.
Yeah, it is. These people, they put their trust in these organizations, in the U.S. government, and suddenly that trust is gone.
And that loss of trust has to have ripple effects, right?
Absolutely. Spectrum talks about how this could damage the U.S.'s reputation as a reliable partner in global development. Like, why would other countries want to work with the U.S. on aid initiatives if they can't count on consistent funding?
It makes you wonder about the motivations behind this funding pause in the first place. Is it really just about fiscal responsibility, or is there something else going on?
Right, and unfortunately, neither article really digs into the political side of things, but it does raise an important point. We need to be more aware of how these decisions are made and what the consequences are. We can't just accept the official narrative at face value.
We have to dig deeper, ask the tough questions.
Exactly.
So where did that leave us? We've got ADRA trying to weather the storm, and we've got Spectrum sounding the alarm about the potential for widespread suffering and long-term damage.
It's this tension between optimism and pessimism that makes this whole situation so compelling. It's a reminder that even with the best of intentions, things can go wrong, and we need to be prepared to deal with the fallout.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners? What should they be thinking about after this deep dive?
Well, I think the key takeaway is the power of informed action. We need to stay informed. We need to understand how policy decisions impact vulnerable populations. We need to be aware of the work that organizations like ADRA and AHI are doing.
And then we need to use that information to actually do something.
Right, whether it's donating, advocating for change, or just educating ourselves and others.
Knowledge without action is just knowledge.
Exactly. And sometimes the most powerful action we can take is just asking questions, challenging assumptions, refusing to accept the status quo.
I like that. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from ADRA's official response to the very real and very concerning realities on the ground.
Yeah, we have.
It's a complex situation for sure. But hopefully this deep dive has given our listeners some food for thought.
I hope so.
And for those who want to learn more about ADRA and the work they're doing, you can visit their website. It's adra.org. You can find information about their programs, their impact, and ways to contribute.
Every little bit helps.
Well, that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better world.